The North Atlantic War by Michael Trela. Prologue, Part 1. April 28th, 2028. It was cold, very cold. I thought for sure that my toes were frozen despite my snow boots and moccasins. I knew that snow was one of the best insulators in the world, but the mine was just so large and there were so few sources of heat that it didn't make a difference. My father bought it thinking that it would be a safe investment, and although he hadn't been the highest bidder, the Greenlanders were looking for any reason not to give it to some Beijing mining company, like I would know what the heck it's called, so he got it. At the worst time, too. I only realized that he had a need for workers in that ice hole after I asked him if he could help me find a job. Big mistake. The natives were happy, though. Half of the men working with me were Greenlanders, and they were overjoyed to be working, especially not for a Chinese company. They asked me questions all the time about what life in America was like, stared amazedly when I talked about Detroit, and laughed heartily when I told them that Michigan was shaped like a mitten. They're nice people, the lot of them. I just wish I was as cold weather accustomed as they are. I even became really good friends with one of them, a man named Alexei, to the point where he lets me call him Al, and I let him call me Frank. He gave me plenty of tours of nearby Gotthab, which is extremely small for a national capital. It was my third week of working down in that mine. Al and I were side by side as usual, talking, joking, and drowning out each other with perfectly timed bursts from our jackhammers. As I drilled through a tough layer of granite, my arms began to shake and bounce like crazy as I struck something that I couldn't break. I shook my arms and shrugged my shoulders, trying to stop the muscle spasms that were still tingling them. Then I bent down to see what the deal with this stubborn rock was. Al still laughing heartily at how stupid I looked when I hit it. He still remarks about it. "Remember that time when your hammer jacked you?" I had to turn on my headlamp to see it, but I still doubted my eyes when I did. Light was reflecting from it. I couldn't believe it. "Frank," Al said, stooping down next to me and slapping me on the back with his massive hand. "You did it!" His excitement drew an instant crowd. "Praise the Lord! Everyone! Silver! Frank struck silver!" I didn't even pay attention to them. One thing and one thing only was on my mind. I left my tools and ran for the exit. I couldn't wait to get to the outpost and get to the phone. When I did, before my father had even asked who was calling, I thanked him. Thanked him for buying the mine. Thanked him for the job there. Thanked him for being my dad. Francis Sorbet. 2027 was not a good financial year for Greenland. Its own monetary currency was losing value by the month. The fishing industry was collapsing. People were going hungry. Jobs disappearing faster than welfare programs could be initiated to save the unemployed, which is especially bad for a nation that didn't even have a population of 60,000. The Royal Danish government was loaning millions to its desperate, fledgling subsidiary, money which the Greenland Parliament had no hope of paying off by the deadlines. Pressure from companies in China that were seeking to buy land from them flooded in, driving them further into the hands of Denmark, thus neutralizing any progress toward total autonomy made in the last 2 decades. Such was the nation's plight when an American mining company headed by Brent Sorbet bought a 25-acre plot of land just north of Gotthab. Using revolutionary excavation technology, the American miners were able to establish a large, solid, and safe mine outside the Greenland capital's outskirts. The major setback, though, was that they didn't exactly know what they were mining. Sorbet had bought the land and established the mine in an attempt to help the Greenlanders and keep the Chinese out. However, although the natives were overjoyed at the sight of new jobs, their first 4 months were spent digging through meter upon grueling meter of tough granite. If they found nothing for much longer, Brent's efforts and investments would prove in vain. Mr. Sorbet was on the verge of laying off nearly a fourth of his workers when his prayers were answered. sitting in his favorite lounge chair in his home's living room, pondering pros and cons of laying off whom, and how many of whom, his cell phone rang. Good. Something to get my mind off that mine, he thought. Upon answering it, he was met by the excited voice of his son Francis before he had even asked hello. Aggravated, he wanted to cut his son off and scold him for his lack of etiquette, but held his tongue. Francis was thanking him. Thanking me? What for? Then the news came. He listened. Then his jaw dropped. Good job, son. I'm proud of you. He hung up the phone. When his wife came into the room and asked him what was going on, he beamed at her, a broad smile across his face. He stood up, took her in his arms, and kissed her. She later described the moment thus. He was happy, happier than I had seen him in months. His eyes burned with a fire that told of success. I knew that something wonderful must have happened. News spread rapidly. As it turned out, the mine was actually rich with silver, gold, iron, and titanium. The revenue collected from the extracted resources led Sorbet to consider expanding. Based on his experiences with the first mine and knowledge of the geological structure of Greenland, Sorbet purchased another plot of land further north and built a new mine, creating more jobs and bringing more people out of the depression. This one ended up being a jackpot of coal, copper, and zinc. It was unbelievable. The Greenlandic Parliament hadn't had the money nor the material to operate such mines, and so the fact that their own soil harbored so much precious metal remained hidden. Not anymore. It didn't take long for other companies to catch on to what Sorbet was doing. 3 more American mining companies had bought land in Greenland and established themselves by October of that same year. In May of 2030, the first Canadian company entered the competition. 2031 saw England and Germany set up their own mines. The revenue which the Greenlandic government acquired from the taxes on the mines were more than it had seen in half a decade. In 2032, it officially paid off its first loan from Denmark. Mining companies pioneered the business boom in Greenland, but they weren't the only ones to reap rewards from intuitive investments in the area. Using private funds, his knowledge of the oil fields in Alaska and northern Canada, and discarded geological data from the late 20th century, George Stronberg, CEO of American Oil Co., made a daring move and established the most advanced and expensive oil rig the world had ever seen just off the coast of Thule. His plan proved worthwhile as the rig struck a massive oil deposit beneath a layer of ice that had precariously formed at the bottom of the Arctic Ocean's outer rim. Unlike Sorbet, however, he capitalized on the situation and quickly bought the rights to all the oil deposits around the northwest coast of Greenland within the Arctic Ocean. Still, other oil companies made similar gambles along the southwestern and northeastern coasts, most of which met with similar success. With natural resources being exploited in their tons, workers were needed en masse to fuel the ever-growing job market born from the massive economic boom. While the Greenland population had grown by now to around 120,000, it still wasn't nearly enough. This led the corporations to reach out to the people of their own nations, thus sparking the largest immigration movement in Greenland's history. Americans, Canadians, British, Irish, Germans, and Austrians came flooding to the country to fill the myriad of open jobs. In 2034, the number of people registered living in Greenland was over 1 million. Villages sprang up around the major mines and along the coasts were nearest the major oil drilling sites. As the immigration continued, the villages grew into towns. The lack of common conveniences inspired people to write to their relatives who were skilled in trades and invite them over to where their talents would be most appreciated. Thus, the population continued to swell as tradesmen from all over North America and Northern Europe flocked to set up business in the new towns. The massive amounts of mined metals led to the construction of factories, steel mills, and machine plants. More residential buildings were now being constructed with greater efficiency and security. With the population at 3 million by 2035, the towns grew into cities. Godthab alone had reached a population of 125,000, more than the entire country had only 5 years before. The metals collected from the plenitude of mines combined with the coal and oil to create a modern-day housing with enough fuel for heat and lighting all throughout the country. March of 2037 saw one major iron mine dry up near Nanortalik. It came as a shock to the whole nation, which was now at 7 million people, reminding of the terrible truth that the resources were not infinite. The people became doubtful, buying less, saving more. The Greenlandic Parliament's tax revenue dropped 20%, bringing their ability to make their payments to Denmark to a halt. For 2 months they brooded over the situation, not knowing how to pull through without major tax hikes and destabilizing the lives of the people. It wasn't until June that none other than Francis Sorbet, who had taken over his father's company upon Brent's retirement, made a move in his father's footsteps and took a gamble. Investing several million in the latest in construction and excavation technology, he decided that he would open a mine 70 miles northeast of Godthab. This came as rash and foolhardy to his competitors, as this meant that he would be cutting into the thickest sheets of ice in the world to build his mine. I knew I was risking it all with the move, he commented. But my father wasn't afraid to take chances, and now he has a whole country of grateful people behind him. Besides, my gut told me that it was the right thing to do. It took nearly 6 months for his men to get through the ice and begin actual mining. 1 week later, they struck platinum. Thus, Francis Sorbet became a hero in the eyes of the Greenlanders, and the mining industry expanded once again, the population along with it. With existing cities becoming larger and new cities springing up further and further inland, transportation became a major issue. Snowmobiles and dog sleds had been the most reliable means, but they were now not enough. Building and maintaining roads between the Arctic Circle cities would be an economic nightmare until a more efficient method for the task could be thought up. Ships were reliable and relatively quick, but they only worked around the coast. It was then that the workers in a steel plant in Kulusuk discovered a new iron-carbon titanium alloy that could be used to make a reinforced form of steel, more durable and less quick to freeze. The government decided to implement a massive railway system to connect the country. Before long, railroads linked fuel to Nanortalik, Godthab to Daneborg, and everywhere in between. Roads still make up streets within the cities, but cross-national highways didn't emerge until the late 2040s. By 2039, the Greenland government had paid off all their loans from Denmark, years ahead of schedule, and its population was at 12.5 million people. All the metals, particularly iron, which they had, were now being exported to the United States, Canada, and several northern European nations. Their primary imports were agricultural products and meat, which hadn't changed. Overall, they were exporting 3 times more than they imported, the first time in history that they had managed to export more than import. The large number of Germans, British, and Americans now living in Greenland caused English to become a national second language, and would eventually phase out Danish and native Greenlandic as the official language of the country. Parliament had been dreaming of and planning on declaring official independence from the Kingdom of Denmark for decades. Now that they were an official, modern, self-sustaining, industrial nation, they felt that they were ready to act.